Some places aren't abandoned. They're waiting for someone who still knows how to listen. The bridge groaned softly under Ethan Cole's boots as he stepped onto its splintered planks, the wood bending just enough to remind him that time had been here first and would be here long after he was gone. The river below stretched wide and dark, nearly 40 feet across, its surface smooth but restless, reflecting the last cold light of dusk like glass that couldn't decide whether to hold or break. He paused halfway, breath rising in thin clouds, the scent of wet timber and iron filling the air. Behind him, the broken house clung to the edge of the bridge like something forgotten, half leaning, half refusing to fall, its windows hollow, its frame whispering with every shift of wind. And beside him, Rex stopped without command, the German shepherd's paws planted firm, ears rising high, eyes no longer scanning the trees or the house, but locked downward, straight into the river. Ethan noticed the stillness first, then the tension, then the silence that followed, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty but full, as if something unseen had drawn a breath and was holding it, waiting. "You hear something?" Ethan asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. Rex didn't bark, didn't move, just tilted his head slightly as if aligning himself with a sound too faint for human ears. And then it came, not loud, not sharp, but deliberate, a soft tap beneath the water, then nothing, then again, tap, spaced out, patient, measured. Ethan felt his chest tighten before his mind could catch up. He knew that rhythm, had counted it once in a place far from rivers and trees, where silence meant survival, and every second carried weight. He looked down at the dark current, trying to convince himself it was driftwood, or shifting stone, or the natural settling of a river that had carved its path for decades. But Rex took one step forward, closer to the edge, claws scraping lightly against the wood, and let out 3 low, controlled barks, not alarm, not fear, but recognition. The same signal he had used years ago when something beneath the surface wasn't supposed to be there. Ethan swallowed. Slowly, eyes narrowing, the water moved again, just slightly, a ripple against the current, subtle enough to miss if you weren't looking for it, but impossible to ignore once you saw it, like the river itself had responded. And in that moment, standing between a broken house and a living current, Ethan understood something he hadn't expected to feel again. Not fear, not doubt, but the quiet pull of something unfinished, something waiting, not for anyone, but for someone willing to stop and listen long enough to hear it call. The sound did not come again right away, and that silence somehow felt heavier than the tapping itself, stretching across the bridge like a question Ethan could not yet answer. He stayed there longer than he intended, counting without realizing it. 1, 2, 3, all the way up until 27, and just as his breath slowed into the rhythm of the river, it came again. Softer this time, but unmistakable, a measured knock beneath the surface, as if something below was keeping time with a world above it. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand resting on the cold railing, the metal biting through his glove. Rex shifted beside him, but did not break focus, his body angled toward the exact same point in the water as before, not scanning, not guessing, but certain, always certain. Ethan had learned to trust that kind of certainty even when it made no sense, especially when it made no sense. He stepped back from the edge and looked toward the house behind them, its silhouette barely holding together in the fading light. A place bought for almost nothing, dismissed by everyone else as unstable, unsafe, not worth the effort. And yet here they were, standing at the center of something that already felt far from ordinary. He rubbed his jaw, the rough stubble catching against his glove, and let his eyes drift back to the river. The current looked steady, flowing south like it always had. But there was a subtle break in it now, a slight hesitation where the surface dipped inward before smoothing out again, as if the water itself was acknowledging something below, something interrupting its path. "That is not just drift," he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. Rex responded with a low hum in his chest, not quite a growl, more like a vibration, the kind that came when he was processing, thinking in the quiet way animals do. Ethan took a step toward the far side of the bridge, boots creaking against the aging boards, and crouched near the edge where Rex had been staring. The wood there was darker, damp from years of mist rising from the river below. He reached down and ran his fingers along the surface, feeling for looseness, for signs of repair, for anything that might explain what lay beneath. And that was when he noticed it, faint markings etched into the underside of the railing, almost worn away by time, but still visible if you looked closely enough, straight lines intersecting at sharp angles, not decorative, not random, but deliberate, measured, like something engineered. He leaned closer, narrowing his eyes, tracing the shape with his finger. It resembled a grid, or maybe a map, and one point was marked slightly deeper than the rest, a single indentation as if someone had pressed harder there, emphasizing its importance. Rex shifted again and placed one paw gently against that exact spot on the wood, then looked back at Ethan, amber eyes steady. Waiting, Ethan felt a slow realization settle into his chest. This was not just a house on a broken bridge. It was a place someone had marked, someone had mapped, someone had known. He straightened slowly, gaze drifting once more to the dark water below. The river moved like it always had, but now it no longer felt empty. It felt occupied, intentional, as if beneath that calm surface something had been left behind, not forgotten, not lost, but waiting with a patience that did not belong to time alone. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan did not feel like a man wandering without direction. He felt like someone who had just stepped into the beginning of something that had already been set in motion long before he arrived. The markings stayed in Ethan's mind long after he stepped off the bridge, like a quiet echo that refused to fade. He moved toward the house with slow, deliberate steps, each board beneath his boots creaking in its own tired voice, and Rex followed close at his side but kept glancing back toward the river as if whatever called from below had not finished speaking. The front door resisted at first, swollen from years of damp air, then gave way with a low sigh that seemed almost relieved. Inside, the air felt colder than outside, still and heavy, carrying the scent of aged wood and something faintly metallic, like rain trapped in walls that had not fully dried in decades. Ethan paused just inside the doorway, letting his eyes adjust. The last light of evening stretched through narrow windows, casting long pale lines across the floor. Dust floated in that light like slow-falling snow, untouched, undisturbed. He set his pack down near the wall and removed his gloves, flexing his fingers as the chills settled deeper into his skin. Rex moved ahead of him, nails clicking softly against the floorboards, his nose low, tracing invisible paths that only he could understand. He did not explore the whole room, did not wander. Instead, he moved in a steady line toward the far wall, then stopped, his body stiffening again, not in fear, but in recognition. Ethan followed, each step careful, aware now that this place might hold more than what could be seen at a glance. The wall itself looked ordinary, aged planks, slightly warped, but near the base there was a subtle difference, a narrow section where the wood seemed newer, or perhaps less worn, as if it had been replaced at some point and then left to age with the rest. Ethan crouched, running his hand along the surface. The grain changed under his fingers, smoother in one spot, and there, just barely visible, a thin seam, not wide enough to notice unless you were searching for it. Rex let out a soft breath and tapped the floor twice with his paw, a quiet, insistent gesture. Ethan pressed gently against the panel, nothing at first, then a slight shift, almost imperceptible, but enough. He adjusted his grip and pushed again, slower this time, and the wood gave way, with a muted sound, revealing a shallow cavity behind it. Inside lay something wrapped in oilcloth, edges worn but carefully folded, untouched by dust, untouched by time. Ethan lifted it out with both hands, the fabric cool and slightly damp, as if it had been waiting in the dark for years. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a set of aged papers, thick, yellowed, but preserved, the top sheet covered in precise lines and measurements, a schematic, detailed and deliberate, not of the house, but of the bridge, and beneath it, extending downward, a structure mapped beneath the river, angles and chambers drawn with a level of care that spoke of intention, not accident. Ethan's breath slowed as he studied it, recognizing the discipline in the lines, the kind of mind that built with purpose and planned for time. There were notes along the margins, faded but legible, coordinates, depth markings, and one phrase written more clearly than the rest, underlined twice as if meant to endure. Access only when the river listens. Ethan glanced up, the words settling into the silence around him. Rex stood still beside him, watching, waiting, as if he already understood what Ethan was only beginning to see. This place had not been abandoned. It had been prepared, and whatever lay beneath the river was not hidden by chance, but by design, waiting for someone who would not just find it, but recognize the moment when it was ready to be found. The paper felt heavier than it should have in Ethan's hands, not because of its weight, but because of what it carried, intention preserved across years that no one had come to claim. He spread the schematic carefully across a cleared section of the floor, smoothing its edges with slow, deliberate movements. Rex lowered himself beside it, eyes following the lines as if they meant something to him beyond instinct. The room around them settled into a deeper quiet, the kind that pressed inward, making every small sound sharper. The faint creak of wood, the whisper of wind slipping through cracks, and somewhere beyond the walls, the steady movement of the river. Ethan leaned closer, tracing the drawn structure with his finger. The bridge above was simple, straightforward, but beneath it the design changed, expanding into a series of chambers that did not match anything required for support or drainage. This was not reinforcement, it was construction with purpose, something meant to exist hidden, something meant to endure. He studied the depth markings along the side, 15 feet, 20, then nearly 30 feet below the surface, deeper than a casual build, deeper than anything exposed to current or erosion. Whoever designed this had planned for time, for pressure, for silence. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly as a familiar feeling returned. Not fear, not exactly, but awareness, the same quiet alertness that had once guided him. Through places where everything depended on noticing what others missed, he shifted his gaze to the phrase written along the margin. Access only when the river listens. The words lingered in his mind, not as a warning, but as a condition, something that required patience, something that could not be forced. Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears angling toward the door, his body going still again. That same focused stillness Ethan had learned to trust. A second later the sound returned, faint but clear, tap, from beneath the water, then silence. Ethan looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. He counted without thinking, the seconds passing in steady rhythm, and at 27, another tap, the same pattern, the same controlled spacing, like a signal repeating itself with quiet determination. Rex rose to his feet and moved toward the doorway, glancing back once as if to make sure Ethan followed. There was no hesitation this time. Ethan folded the schematic carefully, securing it inside his jacket, and stood, the boards beneath him creaking softly as if acknowledging the decision. Outside the air had grown colder, the last light nearly gone, leaving the river a darker shade of moving shadow. They stepped back onto the bridge, the wood groaning under their weight. But Ethan no longer saw it as broken. He saw it as a path, a line drawn above something hidden with intention. Rex moved ahead to the same spot as before, standing exactly where the markings on the railing had pointed, his posture firm, expectant. Ethan approached slowly, eyes fixed on the water below. The surface shifted again, subtle but present, a small circular disturbance against the current, as if something beneath had answered their return. The river did not feel random anymore. It felt responsive, aware in a way that logic could not fully explain. Ethan rested his hand on the railing, the cold metal grounding him, steadying his thoughts. He had spent years learning when to act and when to wait, when to trust instinct over explanation, and now, standing above a hidden structure mapped by someone long gone, guided by a dog that never guessed wrong, he understood that this was not about forcing entry or chasing answers too quickly. It was about listening, about recognizing the moment when the river itself allowed the next step. And as the sound came again beneath the surface, measured and patient, Ethan realized that moment was drawing closer, not because he had found the place, but because the place had begun to respond to him. The rhythm beneath the river no longer felt distant. It felt closer, more defined. As if whatever lay below had grown aware of being noticed, Ethan stood motionless on the bridge, eyes fixed on the subtle distortion in the current. And this time he did not look away when the sound came again. Tap, soft but certain, echoing upward through water and wood. Rex responded instantly, stepping forward with controlled urgency, his body aligned with the same invisible point, his ears high, his breath steady, not a sign of panic, only focus. Ethan exhaled slowly and dropped to one knee. Pressing his palm flat against the worn planks beneath him, the wood carried a faint vibration, barely there, but real. A quiet pulse that matched the timing he had already begun to count. 27 seconds, again and again. Too consistent to be random, too precise to be natural. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the pattern settle into him, letting instinct rise where logic hesitated. Then he stood and moved without speaking, crossing back toward the house with purpose. Rex followed immediately, not questioning, not hesitating, the bond between them built on years of trust where words had never been necessary. Inside, the cold air seemed sharper now, as if the walls themselves were listening. Ethan moved to his pack and pulled out a flashlight, its beam cutting a clean line through the dim interior, then a length of rope, coiled and worn but reliable. He paused only once, glancing back toward the bridge through the open doorway, the river beyond shifting faintly in the dark. Waiting, he returned to the schematic tucked inside his jacket and unfolded it again, laying it flat under the beam of light, his eyes scanning the depth markings, the angles, the narrow access point drawn just beneath the central span, not wide, not obvious, but there, placed. With intent, he traced the line downward, calculating distance in his mind, 30 feet below the surface at its deepest point. But the access chamber sat higher, closer to 18 feet, still submerged but reachable with the right approach. He studied the notes again, searching for anything he had missed. And there, near the lower corner, almost hidden in the fold, a small notation he had overlooked before, a symbol marking current flow, indicating a shift, a moment when the river slowed just enough to allow safe descent, not permanent, not predictable without observation, but tied to a cycle, a rhythm. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly as understanding formed. This was not just about finding the entrance. It was about timing it, about entering when the river itself made space. Rex let out a quiet huff and turned toward the door again, his patience thinning, his instincts already ahead of Ethan's thoughts. Ethan folded the map carefully and secured the rope over his shoulder, his movements steady now, decided. He stepped back onto the bridge, the night air colder, the sky deepening into a wide, dark blue scattered with faint stars. The river below seemed darker still, but alive in a way that could not be ignored. He moved to the marked position and looked down once more. The surface shifted again, subtle but present, and then, as if in response to his readiness, the current slowed, just slightly. A gentle easing that created a small, calm pocket against the flow. Ethan felt it more than saw it. A change in the rhythm. A quiet opening. Rex stepped to the edge and looked back at him, not urging, not warning, simply confirming. Ethan secured the rope to the bridge post with practiced hands, the knot firm, tested twice. Then he wrapped the line around his wrist and leaned forward, gaze steady, breath controlled. For a moment he did not move. He simply listened, to the water, to the pattern beneath it, to the quiet certainty building inside him. And when the next tap rose from below, perfectly timed, perfectly placed, he knew the river was no longer resisting, it was allowing. And that was the moment he had been waiting for. The rope tightened in Ethan's grip as he eased himself over the edge, boots sliding carefully along the worn wood before finding nothing but open air beneath them. The river waited below, dark and steady, its surface shifting in slow, controlled patterns as if aware of his descent. He did not rush, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. The same discipline that had once carried him through places where one wrong step meant everything. Rex remained above, standing at the edge of the bridge, unmoving, his silhouette outlined against the dim sky, eyes locked on Ethan with unwavering focus, not anxious, not afraid, but present, always present. The rope creaked softly as Ethan lowered himself further, the cold air thickening as he neared the water, a sharp scent of minerals and damp stone rising to meet him. When his boots finally broke the surface, the chill spread instantly, not overwhelming, but precise. A reminder that he had crossed into something different, something deeper. He steadied himself, letting the current press gently against his legs, testing balance, testing control. The water here was slower, just as the schematic had suggested, a subtle pocket where movement softened and space opened. He leaned back slightly, adjusting the rope around his wrist, then lowered himself further until the water reached his chest, the cold wrapping around him like a quiet warning. But he did not hesitate, his gaze fixed downward, the flashlight clenched in one hand, its beam cutting through the dark surface in a narrow path, illuminating suspended particles that drifted like dust in air. Then, just below, something solid, a shape interrupting the natural flow. He drew a steady breath and submerged, the world above dissolving into silence, the river pressing in from all sides, the beam of light extending ahead of him. And there it was, just as the map had shown, a structure embedded into the riverbed, not random, not broken, but intact, deliberate, metal panels darkened by time, but still holding their form. He moved closer, the rope guiding his position, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the surface. The metal was cold, smoother than expected, and as his fingers traced along it, he felt the edges, the seams, the unmistakable outline of a door, not large, not obvious, but real, placed with precision beneath layers of water and time. The tapping came again, muted now but clearer underwater, not an echo, not a coincidence, but something that traveled through the structure itself, a signal carried through metal. Ethan held still for a moment, listening, feeling, letting the rhythm align with his own pulse. Then his light shifted slightly, revealing a recessed section near the center of the door, a small indentation shaped unlike anything natural, a key point, or perhaps something more. He reached toward it slowly, not forcing, not guessing, but following the same instinct that had brought him here, his fingers brushing the surface just as the next tap came. And for a brief moment, everything aligned, the sound, the structure, the stillness of the water. And he understood that this was not just an entrance waiting to be opened, it was something waiting to be answered. The moment Ethan's fingers touched the indentation, the vibration changed, not stronger, not louder, but different, as if the rhythm beneath the water had acknowledged him. He held his position, suspended in the cold current, the beam of his flashlight steady against the metal surface, and waited. The next tap came sooner this time, not by much, but enough to break the pattern he had counted so carefully. And that small shift told him more than any measurement could. This was not a machine repeating itself. This was something responding, something aware of timing beyond simple mechanics. He pressed his palm flat against the door, feeling the faint pulse travel through it, a quiet resonance that seemed to move inward rather than outward, as if the structure held its own breath beneath the weight of the river. Ethan adjusted his position slightly, the rope tightening above him, anchoring him to the world he had come from. But everything below felt separate now, contained within its own rules. He studied the indentation again, tracing its edges with careful precision. It was not shaped for a tool, not for a key in the traditional sense. It was smoother, curved in a way that suggested contact rather than force. He removed his glove with his free hand, letting it drift slightly before catching it against his arm, then placed his bare hand against the metal, the cold sharper now, immediate. But beneath it there was something else, a subtle warmth, not physical, but sensed, like the difference between touching something empty and something that held presence. The next tap came again, closer, more aligned with his own pulse. And without thinking, he pressed his hand more firmly into the indentation. The response was immediate, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. The vibration shifted into a steady hum, low and constant, spreading outward through the structure. The beam of his light flickered slightly as the current around him changed, pulling gently inward toward the door, as if the river itself had begun to lean closer. Ethan held steady, resisting the urge to move too quickly, to force what had just begun. And then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the seam along the edge of the door revealed itself more clearly, a thin line widening by fractions, releasing a stream of darker water from within, not rushing, not collapsing, but opening with intention. He felt the shift in pressure first, a subtle change that moved against his chest. Then the sound followed, no longer a tap, but a continuous tone, low and steady, like a breath finally released after being held for years. Ethan angled his light inside the narrow opening, the beam disappearing into a space that did not reflect it back immediately, a void shaped by design, not erosion. He reached forward carefully, fingers brushing the edge of the opening, the metal smooth, maintained in a way that did not match the years it had spent hidden beneath the river. And in that moment, a realization settled into him with quiet certainty. This place had not been left behind. It had been preserved, not for anyone, but for someone who would understand how to approach it, not with force, not with haste, but with patience and attention. Above him, faint through the water, he felt the tension in the rope shift as Rex moved on the bridge, not pulling, not panicking, just adjusting, staying connected, and Ethan allowed himself one steady breath before moving forward, not as someone breaking into a hidden place, but as someone finally being allowed to enter it. The opening widened just enough for Ethan to slip through, and as he pulled himself forward, the river released him with a quiet reluctance, the current brushing past his shoulders like a boundary he was crossing rather than breaking. His flashlight cut ahead into the dark chamber beyond, and for a moment there was nothing, just a hollow space, where light seemed to disappear instead of reflect. Then slowly, the shape of the interior began to reveal itself, not rough, not collapsed, but structured, the walls smooth and deliberate, reinforced with the same metal that formed the door. The water inside was calmer, almost still, as if the chamber had been designed to shield itself from the river's movement. Ethan moved carefully, guiding himself through the narrow entrance until his boots found a surface beneath him, solid, level, not mud or stone but something built. His head broke the surface and he drew in a slow breath. The air inside was cool and dry compared to the river, carrying a faint scent of old metal and something else, something preserved. He steadied himself, water dripping from his jacket in soft, rhythmic sounds that echoed slightly against the enclosed space. Rex's presence remained above, a quiet anchor through the tension in the rope, reminding Ethan that he was not alone even here. He lifted the flashlight higher, sweeping the beam across the chamber. The light revealed a narrow platform extending from the entrance, leading toward a deeper section of the structure. The floor beneath him was not worn or decayed. It held its shape with quiet strength, as if it had been waiting without interruption. The walls bore faint markings, not damage, not erosion, but intentional lines, similar to those on the schematic, guiding, indicating direction, purpose. Ethan stepped forward slowly, each movement measured, his boots leaving small pools of water behind him that did not spread far. The surface here was sealed, contained, as if even moisture was not meant to linger. The chamber did not feel abandoned, it felt maintained in a way that did not rely on time, but on design, as if it had been built to remain exactly as it was until someone arrived. The beam of his light reached farther now, revealing a second section ahead, separated by a low threshold. Beyond it, something stood against the far wall, partially obscured by shadow, a structure within the structure, rectangular, deliberate. Ethan paused, letting his eyes adjust, letting the silence settle again. There was no sound of water here, no echo of the river above, only the faint hum that still lingered in the walls, steady, constant, like a presence that had shifted from calling to waiting. He took another step forward, the air unchanged, the temperature steady, everything controlled, and as the light finally reached the object at the far end, its surface caught just enough to reveal a smooth panel, unbroken, untouched, with the same curved indentation he had felt beneath the river, only this time larger, more defined, placed at the center as if meant to be seen. Ethan felt the same quiet pull return, not urgency, not fear, but recognition, the understanding that this place was not a discovery in the usual sense. It was a continuation, something that had begun long before him and was now unfolding step by step. And as he stood there in the stillness beneath the river, water slowly dripping from his sleeves, breath steady in the cold air, he realized that whatever this chamber held, it had not been waiting for someone to find it. It had been waiting for someone who would know how to arrive. The panel at the far end did not reflect the light the way ordinary surfaces did. It absorbed it, softened it, as if the material itself understood restraint. Ethan approached slowly, each step measured against the quiet weight of the space. The air remained still, untouched by drafts or decay. and the faint hum in the walls had settled into something almost steady enough to forget, but not quite. Rex's presence lingered above through the tension in the rope, a silent reminder that the world beyond still existed, even if it felt distant now. Ethan stopped a few feet from the panel, letting his eyes trace its edges. The lines were clean, precise, untouched by corrosion or time, and at its center, the curved indentation mirrored the one beneath the river. Only this one felt complete, intentional, not hidden but revealed. He raised his hand slowly, not rushing the moment, not forcing it. The memory of the rhythm beneath the water still steady in his mind. Tap, then silence, then tap again. He aligned his breath with it without realizing. The same quiet discipline returning, the same instinct that told him when to move and when to wait. His fingers hovered just above the surface for a brief moment, feeling the subtle shift in the air, a faint warmth that did not belong to temperature but to presence. Then he pressed his hand into the indentation, and this time the response came not as vibration, but as a soft, steady tone that filled the chamber, low and even, like a distant chord being held. The panel beneath his palm did not move immediately. Instead, it seemed to settle, as if confirming something unseen. Then slowly, almost silently, a thin seam appeared along its edge, widening with controlled precision, not opening outward but sliding inward, revealing a narrow space beyond. Ethan stepped back half a pace, allowing the process to complete without interference. The tone shifted slightly, not louder, but fuller, resonating through the floor beneath his boots, through the walls, through the air itself. When the panel finished its movement, the opening revealed something unexpected, not an empty chamber, not a vault of objects or machinery, but a room that felt lived in, not recently, but intentionally, preserved in a way that suggested care rather than abandonment. The beam of his flashlight reached inside, revealing a small desk fixed to the far wall, its surface clear except for a single object placed at its center, a box, simple in shape, made of the same material as the surrounding structure, its surface smooth, unmarked, yet somehow distinct, as if it carried its own quiet importance. Ethan felt a slow breath leave him as he stepped closer, crossing the threshold without hesitation now, the floor beneath him steady, unyielding, the air unchanged, the silence deeper. He approached the desk, the light settling on the box, and for a moment he did not touch it. He simply stood there, letting the stillness speak in its own way. This was not a place of accident, not a forgotten space lost beneath years of water and time. It was something that had been set aside, protected, waiting not for discovery, but for recognition. And as Ethan reached forward at last, his hands steady, his thoughts clear, he understood that whatever this box held, it was not meant to be taken quickly. It was meant to be received. The box did not look extraordinary at first glance, and that was what made it stand apart. It did not demand attention. It held it quietly, as if it had no need to prove its importance. Ethan rested his hand on its surface, the material cool beneath his fingers, smoother than anything exposed to time should have been, and for a moment he did not move. He simply let his palms settle there, feeling for any shift, any signal. The faint tone that had filled the chamber earlier had softened now, fading into something almost imperceptible, like a presence stepping back to allow space. Ethan drew a slow breath and gently lifted the lid. There was no resistance, no lock, no mechanism that required force. It opened as if it had been waiting for that exact moment. Inside, there was no gold, no machinery, no object that spoke of wealth in the usual sense. Instead, resting at the center, was a small bundle wrapped in cloth, carefully folded, untouched by dust or decay. He reached in and lifted it out, the weight light but deliberate, as if what it carried mattered more than how much it weighed. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a worn leather journal beneath. Its cover aged but intact, the edges softened by time but preserved with care. Ethan's fingers traced the surface before opening it. The first page revealed handwriting, steady, measured, the kind that came from someone who valued clarity over flourish. He read the first line silently, then again, slower this time, letting the meaning settle. It was not a record of construction, not instructions or calculations. It was a message, written not for anyone, but for someone specific, though no name was given. The words spoke with quiet certainty, as if the writer had trusted that the right person would find them when the time was right. Ethan turned the page. The entries were dated, stretching back decades, detailing not just the creation of the structure beneath the river, but the reason for it. Not to hide something, but to protect it, not from theft, but from being misunderstood. The writer spoke of timing, of waiting, of building something that could only be reached when the one searching understood how to listen, not just to sound, but to pattern, to patience, to the subtle changes that others would overlook. Ethan felt a shift inside him as he read, a quiet alignment between what he had experienced and what had been written long before he arrived. This was never meant to be discovered by chance. It required someone who would not force answers, someone who would recognize when to wait and when to move. He turned another page, and there, tucked carefully between the sheets, was a small photograph, its edges worn but protected. He lifted it gently, bringing it into the beam of light. The image showed a man standing on the very same bridge, years ago when it was whole, his posture calm, his expression steady, and beside him, a dog, similar in form to Rex, ears high, eyes focused. The resemblance was not exact, but the presence was unmistakable. Ethan held the photograph for a long moment, the quiet connection settling deeper than he expected. This was not just a place built with purpose. It was part of something carried forward, something passed not through words alone, but through understanding. He lowered the photograph slowly, his gaze returning to the journal. The final page held only one line, written with the same steady hand, simple, clear, and without explanation. If you are here, then you already know what this is meant for. Ethan closed the journal gently, the silence of the chamber returning around him, but it no longer felt empty. It felt complete, as if something that had waited for years had finally reached the moment it was built for. And standing there beneath the river, with water still drying from his sleeves and the steady weight of the journal in his hands, Ethan understood that what he had found was not something to take, but something to carry forward. The journal rested firmly in Ethan's hands as he stood in the stillness beneath the river, the weight of it no longer measured in ounces but in meaning. He glanced once more around the chamber, letting the quiet settle into him fully. The desk, the panel, the carefully preserved space. None of it felt unfinished anymore. It felt complete, like a sentence that had finally reached its last word. He slipped the journal back into the cloth and secured it inside his jacket, close to his chest, not out of fear of losing it, but out of instinct, as if it belonged there now. Rex shifted above, the rope tightening slightly, a gentle reminder that time had not stopped, only slowed. Ethan turned toward the entrance, his light tracing the path back. The water waited just beyond, dark but no longer unknown. He moved with the same measured calm as before, stepping down from the platform and lowering himself back into the river. The cold returned instantly, wrapping around him with familiar precision, but it no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a passage. He submerged once more, guiding himself through the narrow opening, the structure behind him closing with quiet finality as he passed, the seams sealing without force, without sound, as if it had simply decided its purpose had been fulfilled. The current caught him gently, not pulling, not resisting, just carrying him upward along the line of the rope. Ethan emerged slowly, breaking the surface with a steady breath, the night air filling his lungs, sharper now, clearer. The sky above stretched wide and silent, stars faint but present, and on the bridge, Rex stood exactly where he had been, unmoving until Ethan's head rose above the water, then stepping forward with quiet certainty, tail low, eyes steady. Ethan reached for the rope and pulled himself up, muscles responding with practiced ease. The bridge creaked beneath his weight as he climbed back onto it, water dripping from his sleeves, pooling briefly before disappearing between the gaps in the wood. Rex approached without hesitation, pressing his head lightly against Ethan's shoulder for a brief moment. A simple gesture, grounding, confirming. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's neck, fingers resting in the thick fur, steady, present. They stood there together for a moment, the river flowing beneath them, unchanged to the eye, but no longer the same in meaning. Ethan looked down once more, expecting perhaps another sound, another signal, but the tapping had stopped, the rhythm gone. replaced by the natural movement of water over stone. As if whatever had called him there had finished speaking, he turned back toward the house, the structure no longer appearing broken or forgotten, but simply quiet, waiting in a different way now. He stepped forward, Rex at his side, the night settling around them with a calm that did not feel empty, but full. And as they crossed the bridge together, leaving the river behind for now, Ethan understood something with quiet clarity. The search had not ended beneath the water, it had only begun. There, and whatever came next would not be about uncovering something hidden, but about understanding what had already been given. The house welcomed them back with the same quiet stillness. But something in the air had shifted, not in sound or movement, but in meaning. Ethan stepped inside, the floorboards creaking softly beneath his weight. The familiar scent of aged wood and cold air, now carrying a sense of recognition rather than abandonment. Rex moved ahead slowly, no longer searching, no longer tracking, but simply present, his steps calm, his posture relaxed in a way that had not been there before, as if whatever had called him to attention earlier had settled into rest. Ethan removed his jacket and placed it carefully on the table near the wall, his hand lingering for a moment over the place where the journal rested beneath the fabric. He did not take it out immediately. He did not rush to read further. Instead, he moved through the space with quiet intention, lighting a small lantern he had set aside earlier, its warm glow filling the room with a softer light that pushed back the shadows without chasing them away. He sat down slowly, the chair beneath him steady, and only then did he reach for the journal again, unwrapping it with the same care as before. The leather felt different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. The first pages he had read beneath the river returned to him clearly, the words about patience, about listening, about understanding when something was ready to be found. He turned deeper into the journal this time, past the initial entries, past the notes about construction, and into something more personal. The handwriting remained steady, but the tone shifted, becoming quieter, more reflective. The writer spoke of time passing, of waiting not for an event, but for a person, someone who would not come looking for treasure, but would arrive by simply following what felt right. Someone who would recognize that the structure beneath the river was not the end, but only the beginning. Ethan paused at one entry, dated years after the bridge had already begun to fall into disrepair. The words were fewer here, but more direct. If you have come this far, then you understand that what was built below was never meant to be taken, only revealed. The rest is not hidden in the river. It is carried forward in what you choose to do next. Ethan leaned back slightly, the lantern light flickering gently against the walls, the room around him unchanged but somehow fuller, as if the quiet itself held more presence now. Rex settled down near the doorway, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but aware, always aware. Ethan looked at him for a moment, a faint, almost unnoticeable shift in his expression, not quite a smile, but something close to it. Then he returned his gaze to the journal. The final pages contained no instructions, no maps, no directions to another hidden place. Only reflections, thoughts about purpose, about building something that would outlast a single lifetime. Not through material, but through understanding. Ethan closed the journal slowly, his fingers resting on its cover, the silence settling once more, but this time it felt complete, not waiting, not calling, just present, outside. The river continued its steady path beneath the bridge, unchanged in sound, unchanged in movement, but no longer holding the same mystery. And as Ethan sat there in the quiet warmth of the small room, with the journal resting in his hands and Rex breathing softly nearby, he understood that whatever had been waiting beneath the water had already given him everything it was meant to give, and what remained was not something to search for, but something to live out, step by step, in a way only he could understand. Morning arrived slowly, not with urgency, but with a quiet light that settled across the broken bridge and the still surface of the river below. Ethan stepped outside with the journal held loosely in his hand, the cool air brushing against his face, carrying the faint scent of water and wood that no longer felt unfamiliar. Rex followed beside him, his movements calm, his gaze no longer searching the river, but simply acknowledging it. As one might acknowledge something understood, they walked together onto the bridge, the boards creaking softly beneath their weight, the same sound as before, yet somehow different now. Not a warning, not a reminder of decay, but a part of the place itself, something that belonged. Ethan stopped at the center, the same point where everything had begun, and looked down at the water. It moved steadily, reflecting the pale sky above. No ripples, no signals, no hidden rhythm calling upward, just the quiet flow of a river continuing on its path. He stood there for a moment, not waiting, not expecting, just present. The journal in his hand felt steady, not heavy, not light, but right, as if it had found where it was meant to be. He opened it once more, not to search for answers, but to read a single line he had marked in his mind, the words. Simple, clear, and unchanged. Yet now they carried a different weight. What is built with patience will not call twice. Ethan closed the journal gently, his eyes lifting to the horizon where the trees stood still against the morning light. There was no urgency in him, no need to return to the river or to search beneath it again. Whatever had been waiting there had already fulfilled its purpose, and he had fulfilled his part by listening. Rex stepped closer, brushing lightly against his leg. A quiet presence that asked for nothing and gave everything. Ethan reached down, resting his hand briefly on the dog's head, the connection steady, familiar. Then he turned away from the edge and began to walk back toward the house, his steps unhurried, deliberate, the bridge no longer something to cross, but something to stand upon when needed, something that connected what had been with what would come next. Inside, the house felt warmer in the morning light, the walls catching the sun in a way that softened their worn edges, making the space feel less like something left behind and more like something beginning again. Ethan placed the journal on the table, not hidden, not tucked away, but in the open, where it could remain part of the space rather than separate from it. Rex settled near the doorway, his eyes half closed, at ease in a way that spoke of completion rather than fatigue. Ethan moved to the window, looking out at the river once more, not searching, not questioning, just observing. The water flowed as it always had, but now it carried no mystery, only meaning. And as the light grew stronger and the day unfolded quietly around him, Ethan understood something that did not need to be written down. Not every discovery is meant to change what is outside. Some are meant to change what remains within. And in that stillness, with the past no longer pressing forward and the future no longer pulling ahead, he simply stood, present in a place that had once been hidden, now fully seen, knowing that sometimes the greatest things we find are not the ones we uncover, but the ones we are ready to carry forward without needing to search again.